Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast, where I seek truth in the world's best books. I'm your host, Eric Rostad, coming to you from the beautiful Books of Titans studio in Franklin, Tennessee. My goal is to read 52 books per year and share what I'm learning. I'll talk a bit about each book, tie ideas together from a variety of genres, and share the one thing I always hope to remember from each book. Today I'm going to cover Rembrandt Is in the Wind by Russ Ramsey, learning to love art through the eyes of faith. This was book 9 for my 2022 reading list. Well, in the year 2004, I went on a family trip to Italy. And as part of that trip, we had a few days in Florence to explore the great art museums that are in Florence. And I remember vividly walking into one of them, and as you're walking in, they're handing you this brochure, and right on the front of it is the main attraction for this gallery. And so you're walking in and you know what you're about to see. And in this case, I knew I was about to see Michelangelo's statue of David. And so I'm walking into this building, and you kind of go down this hallway, and it's just crowded the day that we're there. It's in the summer, and so it's just packed, and it's hard to see it. You're walking down this hall. It's at the end of the hallway. You know it's there, but it's kind of hard to see it with all the people. And I remember getting to a point in the room where I looked up and I lost my breath. Like, seeing that work of art actually took my breath away. And that has only happened a handful of times in my life. I mean, I know it 3 times, and I know exactly each of the 3 times what I saw and when my breath was taken away. And that was one of the times. And it was how do you account for that? Like, how can you seeing a work of art, how can that take your breath away? How can that have such an impact on your physical being that you lose your breath? That's a question I've carried with me for a long time, and it's a question that Russ digs into in this book, Rembrandt Is in the Wind. So just to back up for a second, this book, it's a dive into 9 different artists, and that encompasses chapters 2 through 10. So each of those chapters digs into an artist and a particular work of art that they have done and how they did it. So the tools that they use, the tools of the trade, the story of the life of that artist, and the subject matter. So if the subject matter was a story, like for the statue of David, you go into that story. And then you see, okay, why did Michelangelo sculpt David at this part of the story? Because most of the time you see David hovering over Goliath, who is, and he's removing his head, and it's the point in which he has conquered, little David has conquered mighty Goliath, and that's how most of the time you see that work of art. But Michelangelo chose a period before the actual fight, and it's David. He's got his sling over his shoulder, and the fight is about to occur. So why did he do it before the fight? And so just kind of asking these questions about the art, about the artist, it's that kind of a dive into these 9 different artists and the art that they created. But chapter 1 is how did we get here in the first place? How can a work of art take my breath away when I see it? And Russ goes in that chapter, in that first chapter, that he says we were made for 3 things. We were made for goodness, truth, and beauty. And the interesting thing that he points out about those three things, goodness, truth, and beauty, is that they never expire. We never get tired of those things. And it's a really interesting thing to think about. Like, you can never get tired of beauty. It's something that it just doesn't stop. Like, you can keep looking and seeking after beauty and never be quenched. You can keep seeking after truth, and you can keep seeking after goodness, and those things you'll never get to the end of that well. And I thought that was just such a beautiful insight. But this book really digs in deep on those 3 things, but in particular on beauty. So Russ's goal here is to curate beauty. But it's not just to curate the art. but to curate the lives of these men and women that created the art, to dig in deep to their journeys of faith, and as the subtitle of the book also says, learning to love art through the eyes of faith. So I really enjoyed this book. This is actually the fifth book that I've read by Russ, and I have been fascinated with art since the early 2000s. And I've sought out many of the artists that were highlighted in this book. So it was just a joy to get to know these artists on a deeper level. And then Russ also addressed a lot of the questions that I've had and things that I've pondered over the years. For instance, like, why did my breath get taken away when I saw Michelangelo's David? And I'll address some of those other questions that I've had over the years later in this episode. That's the great thing about this book, though. It addresses these questions, but it addresses art. But you don't have to be an art expert to appreciate this book. And in fact, you don't have to know anything about art to appreciate this book, because Russ writes it in such an approachable way and just provides a great introduction to the works of art that you know. Like Michelangelo's David, you've seen that. You know that. Van Gogh, Rembrandt, Caravaggio, you know these artists and you've seen their work, but to understand the story behind it is so fun. So I recommend this book, and I think no matter where you are in your journey of appreciating art, I think you'll find things to appreciate. As for reading stats for this book, it took me 5 hours and 28 minutes. It is a 272-page book, so that it took me 6 days of reading. In that I did the 5.5 hours of reading within those 6 days. So that equaled 45 pages per day. I like to highlight that just so you know how long it might take you to read the book, and then it also helps me know how much I enjoyed the book, to see how many pages per day. And if it's on the high level, I really enjoyed it. And this was a book that I really enjoyed. I did, however, read it on a digital device, which if you've listened to any of my other episodes, you know that I broke protocol. I broke a rule. One of my rules is I always read the physical copy of a book, but this book is not out yet. And so I read it in advance copy, and Russ is my pastor. So I was part of the launch team for this book and just got a early digital version of it, but I cannot wait to get the physical version. It's very hard for me to read digital versions. I just do not enjoy the experience at all, but I did enjoy the book. And so I can't wait to get that physical copy. I'm going to mark it all up with the things I underlined in the Kindle version, and yeah, it comes out March 22nd. I also want you to buy the book, and as you know from other episodes, I work at Landmark Booksellers. I'm the business manager there. And so with all these episodes, I'm going to start linking to Landmark, to where you can buy this book. So I'd love if you support the local bookstore here in Franklin, Tennessee, Landmark, and that'll also support this project. So I'll have a link in the show notes. You can pre-order the book at this point, and if you use the code Books of Titans and the coupon code, you'll get 10% off. So pre-order it. I'm also going to try to have a special surprise if you do order it. So yeah, order it from the link in the show notes, and that would be greatly appreciated. So now for the rest of this episode, I've got 2 more segments. In the next segment, I'm going to highlight 4 things that stuck out in this book. And then my final segment 3, I always end it with the one thing, my one key takeaway from Rembrandt Is in the Wind by Russ Ramsey. Well, that trip to Italy had a profound impact on my life and in my pursuit of art. After that trip, I moved to Midtown Atlanta, and I lived close enough to the High Museum of Art there that I could walk there. And so I got a membership, and on the weekends, I would go early, right when it opened on Saturday mornings. And the way the museum was set up is that the permanent collections were on floors 1 and 2, but on floor 3, that would be where the exhibits would be. And the exhibits were traveling exhibits, so it'd be works of art from different museums, and they would be brought to the High Museum of Art. And so one of the first years that I was in Midtown Atlanta, the exhibit was Van Gogh. And they had paint. I mean, they had an incredible selection of Van Gogh paintings. And so I would get there right at 10 a.m. and everyone else would work their way up from floor 1 to floor 2 and then go to floor 3. And I had seen the permanent exhibit, and so I would just go right to the third floor. And so when the Van Gogh exhibit was there, I'd be up there by myself, with the guards and all that, but by myself in terms of patrons for like 10 to 15 minutes. And I would just stand in front of these Van Gogh paintings and just be enthralled. And I remember vividly one painting that they had, and that was the olive tree grove. And the story behind that painting is that Van Gogh's friend, Paul Gauguin, had just painted a work of art that was a depiction of Christ, but Gauguin painted himself as Christ. And Van Gogh hated that painting, and he said, I can paint Christ better by painting olive trees. And so this is the work of art. This is your chance to make that decision to determine if Van Gogh captured Christ better than his friend Gauguin did by painting olive trees instead of by painting Christ. And that started a fascination with Van Gogh, and also a very uncomfortable question for me. And it's a question that's also addressed in this book by Russ. How do you reconcile the life with the art? How could something so profound, so sacred, come from someone, for lack of a better term, so profane? You see this question come up with Caravaggio as well in this book, Rembrandt Is in the Wind. While he's picking fights with people and even killing people, he's painting with what Russ calls some of the most profoundly merciful and eloquent commentaries on Scripture, end quote. So Russ does not shy away from these questions, and I found his answers and his treatment of those questions very compelling. Another book that treats Van Gogh very well in terms of these questions was the book by Madeleine L'Engle, Walking on Water. But just that question of how can so Van Gogh, he cut off his ear, he gave it to a prostitute, he shot himself in the stomach, or that's what is believed to have happened. So he committed suicide. He was in an insane asylum. Like how does someone like that, how do they create such sacred and beautiful works of art? And so I loved that Russ dug into those questions and dug into it with different of the artists in this book. Second thing that stuck out to me was this idea of adding paintings to your personal collection. So when a work of art has touched your soul, and let me just take a quick break from this idea to share some beautiful things that Russ wrote about art in the soul. So here's one. This is the mysterious, transcendent quality of art. Something in the liniment oil and pigment breaks through the plane of the canvas and penetrates the human soul in a way that suddenly and inexplicably matters. End quote. And here's a second one. This is the intangibility of genius. To create work that transfers from the canvas, the page, or the instrument into the heart of another person, arousing a longing for beauty and an end to sadness. End quote. So now back to that idea of adding paintings to your personal collection, the paintings that have touched your soul. Russ encourages you that if something has touched your soul, make it yours. Add it to your mind's eye, to your personal collection, be it songs, books, or other works of art. And I loved that idea. This idea that you see a work of art in a museum, maybe you've stood in front of it for half an hour and just stared at it, and it compelled you. It reached your soul. It grabbed you. Add it to your collection. And this collection obviously is not a physical collection unless you're an art thief and not a good career path. But in your mind's eye, in your mind, start collecting works of art that have touched your soul and add it to your personal collection in your mind. I thought that was just such a cool idea, and I want to start doing that. Third idea, the title of the book, Rembrandt Is in the Wind. So 75% of stolen art is unaccounted for, and what they say about that unaccounted for art is that it is in the wind. It will likely never be found again. And the chapter about Rembrandt in this book is about his painting that was stolen from the museum in Boston. And it's so weird to read that chapter, and I've heard Russ talk about it. It's weird because you feel this tremendous sense of loss while you're reading it. The work of art in this case was stolen. It was actually cut out of the frame. The museum has kept the frame up, and there are parts of the painting that it was just roughly cut out. And so there were like jagged parts of the painting that were still there after it was cut out. And Russ has this, he puts this quote that someone said about this, and this person said that this was an unholy tragedy, a monstrous corruption of beauty, end quote. And you just get that sense when you're reading that this work of art was stolen. And Russ tells you all about this beautiful work of art, and it's gone. And it's just devastating to read about. But it's interesting the feelings that you have when you're reading about that. It's a canvas, it's a painting, but it's so much more than that. And the devastation of reading about what happened to this lost work, treated by a thief, it's just tragic. But Russ does such a great job of talking about it. And in this particular painting, Rembrandt has painted himself, and he's painted himself to look at you. So if you're looking at this painting, Rembrandt is staring at you. And so Russ just even brings up the question, did the thief see that? Was the thief confronted with Rembrandt as he was cutting that out of the frame? And it's just such a devastating but beautiful in a way chapter as well. The last thing that stuck out to me was the chapter about Vermeer and how he did his paintings, his method of painting. I had no idea, and it was I'm just completely flabbergasted on how he made his paintings. And I don't want to give it away here because I want you to read this book and I want you to find out how he did his paintings. But it's incredible. And I had never heard that before. And so again, one of these just cool things that I'll be able to know going forward now. And perhaps I'll be in a museum and there'll be a Vermeer there. And I'll know something about how he did that. And to me, that's one of the greatest things, is when people can point out things like that to you. They can curate beauty for you. And so those are some four things that really stuck out to me in this book. In the next segment, I'll cover the one thing. Well, something clicked for me when I read this book, and it came in the chapter on Basile. And here's a quote. Delacroix discovered that one could paint a horse with fine detail and precise proportion and show the viewer a realistic representation of the animal. Or he could paint with fluid, dynamic, unrestrained brushstrokes and give the viewer the impression of a horse in the wild, coiled in fear. The impression of the horse seemed more alive, a truer horse than the realistic portrait. End quote. So you've got a comparison between two types of painting here. One is one with fine detail and precise proportion, and it's almost like a photograph. And that is one way that you can paint a horse. Another way is what we now understand as and call impressionism painting, and that is unrestrained brushstrokes, and it gives the viewer the impression of the horse, and it's the impression the artist had when they were viewing that horse. And I love the end of this quote because it says, the impression of the horse seemed more alive, a truer horse than the realistic portrait. Well, the thing that immediately came to mind when I read this was one of the first books I read for this project. It was actually book 12 in the year 2017. And the book is The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. I think about this book all the time. And what's interesting is at Landmark Booksellers, where I'm business manager, we've been selling this book a lot lately, and I'm not sure why it's come back or why a lot of people are buying it, but people have been buying this one lately, and there is a 2-page chapter in the book that starts on page 179, and it's about story truth and happening truth. And if you've listened to this other episodes of this podcast, you've heard me talk about this. It's something I've talked about quite often, and it's something I think about all the time. And so I want to tie it in with that quote I just read about Delacroix. And here's the part in The Things They Carried. But listen, even that story is made up. I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to know why story truth is truer sometimes than happening truth. Here is the happening truth. I was once a soldier. There were many bodies, real bodies with real faces, but I was young then and I was afraid to look. And now 20 years later, I'm left with faceless responsibility and faceless grief. Here is the story truth. He was a slim, dead, almost dainty young man of about 20. He lay in the center of a red clay trail near the village of My Key. His jaw was in his throat. His one eye was shut. The other eye was a star-shaped hole. I killed him. What stories can do, I guess, is make things present. I can look at things I never looked at. I can attach faces to grief and love and pity and God. I can be brave. I can make myself feel again. Daddy, tell the truth, Kathleen can say. Did you ever kill anybody? And I can say honestly, of course not. Or I can say honestly, yes. End quote. I love that distinction. There's happening truth and there's story truth. And Tim O'Brien here says story truth is truer sometimes than happening truth. Same thing that's in that quote there. The impression of the horse seemed more alive, a truer horse than the realistic portrait. This is just something that has fascinated me since reading Tim O'Brien's book. And I finally connected it to the world of art in seeing the quote in this book. So there's different ways of presenting truth. There's different ways of presenting what happened. There's happening truth, there's story truth. There's a precise depiction of a horse, or there is the impression of the horse. And it would seem like the fine detail and the precise proportion would be the truer version, because it looks like it. That's what we see. But the impression of the horse can seem more alive, or can be a truer horse than the realistic portrait. And I love that, especially with reading books and thinking about how is the author presenting the material. How is the author presenting the story? There are different ways to tell it, and some ways can be more true than others. Now I have that lens of which to view art as well. Why did the artist portray something in this manner? And did that allow the artist to paint a truer method, or a truer portrait, a truer proportion than if they had done it a different way? Just a cool way to think about art, a way to think about portraying truth. And I loved that. I loved that the connection came there. So this book helped me to see a lot of things in a different way, especially in the area of curating beauty, different ways of sharing art, proclaiming truth. And Russ closes out the book with an appendix on how to visit a museum. And that had some just really good advice on ways to approach it. If you've never been to a museum, or you think they're boring, this just had some really practical advice on how to enjoy your time there. Russ is a storyteller, and these collections were wonderful in how he wove together different aspects. So he wove together the art, he wove together the artist, and he wove together the art making. And they are all connected, and understanding each part is crucial to understanding the art that is in front of you. The limitations of Michelangelo's marble slab, or understanding Caravaggio's suffering and torture that he experienced, and how that showed up in his paintings. Or how Edward Hopper captured the inward thoughts of a person through his art. These are just some of the things that Russ goes into and weaves together. as a result of reading that first chapter, I actually changed the subtitle of this reading project. And so right now, my tagline, you heard it at the beginning of this episode, is to seek truth in the world's best books. Well, later this year, I'm going to start reading through the great books. And so I've already changed it to seeking truth in the great books. But I added something after reading the first chapter of this book. And this will be my tagline for the project, my purpose in the project going forward. And I added the word beauty. So instead of just seeking truth, I am going to be seeking truth and beauty in the great books. So thank you, Russ. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at eric@booksoftitans.com. I would love to hear if you end up getting this book. I would love to hear what you think about it and things that stuck out to you, things that perhaps I missed in the episode and that really captured you when you read it. I'll be back in a couple weeks talking about another book in this year's reading project. I do have an episode I want to highlight that is coming up. I'm probably most excited about this episode out of any that I've ever done. And I'm reading the book right now. I'm reading the Figaro trilogy, and then I'm going to do a deep dive into the Marriage of Figaro opera. So I've listened to this opera my entire life. It's the opera by Mozart, and I have no idea what they're saying. I have no idea I kind of know the basics of the storyline, but I don't know the full story of the opera. I've seen the opera performed. I have listened to it countless times, and I have no idea what's happening. And so I'm going to remedy that. I'm going to find out what was in the original play written by Beaumarchais, and then I'm going to read the libretto by de Ponte, I guess you would pronounce it, and then I'm going to listen to the music as I go through the score of the opera. And then I'm going to record a podcast episode where I just do a deep dive. So it's going to be a long episode, but I'm going to go through the story first so that we understand what's happening. I'm going to go through the libretto so to see what was left out of what is in what is shared in the opera, and then I'm going to share different pieces of the opera in the episode and just kind of describe what's going on, how Mozart's using music to portray different emotions or action that's happening. And I can't wait for this. It's going to be so fun, and I can't wait to find out what actually happened in this opera that I've spent so much of my life listening to. So check that out. That'll be coming soon as well. Until then, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.